Well, welcome to another GoldSeek.com radio Gold Nugget presentation. Our featured guest today, Gerald Celente from the Trends Institute. It's official, the current economic downturn is already more lengthy than any recession since the Great Depression. With many pundits calling this the Great Recession, the typical American is in survival mode. Joining me today for a discussion focused entirely on this trend of unemployment, Gerald Celente. Gerald runs the Trends Research Institute and is well known for his surprisingly accurate market forecast. And speaking of forecasts, according to Ben Bernanke, the prospects for a return to growth in the near term, well, they appear good. And that's a direct quote. What country is he referring to, Gerald?
Well, I don't know why anyone would believe Ben Bernanke when his forecasts in the past have been proven so inaccurate. And, of course, this is not a statement to demean him in terms of not being factual. But let the facts speak for themselves. Go back to the record during 2008, even in April, and when we were in recession, he was still wondering whether or not we would get there. And you just keep going on, one wrong call after another. If we had made so many wrong calls in our business, we would have been laughed out of business a long time ago.
That's a good point. I suppose being the head of Princeton isn't quite the same, is it, as running an actual superpower. But the models don't always apply so well to the real world. The U.S. gross domestic product, it has shrunk by 4% in the past year. That's the worst showing since the Great Depression. Folks like Rabini are saying that this current downturn could be much worse than even the recession of 81 and 82. According to the National Bureau of Economic Research, the U.S. economy was in recession for about 16 months back there in the early 1980s. But the current slowdown since December of 2007 is 18 months long.
Even the numbers lie. This is a whole different time than back in the 1980s. There was no Russia. It was the former Soviet Union. China was still, in the getting out of the grips of the Cultural Revolution. They weren't making anything or exporting anything that we were buying. It's a whole different world. We have entered into the early stages of the Great Depression. As we had predicted, we said in 2008 that the Great Collapse would happen in March of 2009. It has. The markets, the world equity markets, collapsed in 2009. What the only difference is that they're calling it a recovery because the Federal Reserve dumped these trillions of dollars into the system. Between Fed, FDIC, and Treasury, some $13 trillion? Chris, this isn't a recovery. It's a cover-up. That's all it is. It's a cover-up. The collapse has happened. And you mentioned about Bernanke, what kind of chops does he have being a professor? And compared to the real world, well, he's just another guy moving the shells. It's all a shell game. The last mover of the shells was Henry Paulson for Treasury. And the one before him and before Bernanke, the shell game master, his name was Greenspan. It's beyond me how people who call themselves thinking adults could be fooled by this con game. And I call it a shell game. You could call it three-card Monte, credit default swaps. You can call it special investment vehicles, auction rate securities. It's a shell game.
Look behind door number one. Well, we see an FDIC that's running low on funds. I thought this was the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. It's the lender, if you will, of last resort to keep the banks solvent should a crisis occur. What happens when the lender of last resort has difficulty securing funds? Well, never fear, Congress can allocate more. So we look behind door number two, or under shell number two, and we see a Congress that suddenly is running low on funds flip over shell number 3, and we realize there's nothing there.
That's what we're saying. The collapse has happened as we predicted. We said it would happen in March. It happened in March. Go back. Everyone talks about the reference points. Oh, the markets are up 40% since the lows in March. It collapsed in March. Again, it's not a recovery. It's a cover-up. It's a cover-up, and it's criminal activity. I say this over and over again. If the people's names on Wall Street were named Celente, Caruso, Mondavi, Puccini, Rossini, Buitoni, Abatelli, Puccio, they call it the mafia.
But at the end of the day, dropping from 15,000 on the Dow Jones down to 6,000, suddenly if you bounce up a little bit, that's not such a recovery. Great Depression style 1931-32 bounces where everyone says, well, see, everything's clear. We're back in shape again. They begin to realize this is going to be a best case scenario, more of an unwinding for another 5, 10, 15 years or more. Care to put some dates, parameters that folks can work with to get an idea of what we could be seeing going forward, Gerald?
Well, the effective unemployment rate is about 19% right now when you add in people that no longer have jobs, you can't find any. They've given up looking, they're off the rolls, or they have part-time jobs and want full-time. It's not going to hit home because of the cover-up. When the cover's unfolded and is pulled back, then the real pain will start to hit. And when we look at where the growth is coming from in the markets, a lot of it, of course, is in the financial sector. And we all know that game. Hundreds of billions of dollars of taxpayer money went to the Goldman Sachs gang, the Chase Manhattan, the Morgan Chase mob. The money was just spread around throughout the financial sector, so of course they're showing profits. And they're giving all kinds of incentives and free rides by the Federal Reserve in their borrowing. So this is only a very temporary respite. It's a remission in the recovery at best, but clearly it's more a cover-up and not a recovery.